Hi, welcome to my channel. My name's Sarah and I'm a stained glass artist. For today's project, I'm going to be showing you how to make an incense holder out of stained glass. I started making these incense holders for myself because I have a very strong personal aesthetic and I couldn't find any for sale that matched exactly what I wanted. And because I'm a crafty gal, I figured I could do it myself, and it's super easy and you can do it too. Like some of my other tutorials, when I went about trying to make this, I couldn't find any instructions on how to do it, so I kind of just figured it out on my own. And so I wanted to show you how to do it so you don't have to go through the same trial and error that I did. So here are some examples of ones that I've made. This one I made for myself. It has a pretty butterfly on it. And it has the little piece there that the incense goes into. And then I also started making more decorative ones, and I sell these at art markets and they do really, really well. For this project and this tutorial, I did make a little free pattern that you can download from my website for free. And it's just a really cute little moon, and this part right here is where the part that holds the incense will go. I will link this below so you can go download it and follow along with this tutorial if you want. So for supplies for this project, the only thing you'll need that's different from your normal stained glass supplies are these 3mm brass tubes. I don't know if you can see that. It's a tube, and this is what the incense is going to sit in. Like so. So when you solder it on, it'll just sit like that. You'll also need some kind of snips or a jewelry saw if you have it, because you're gonna want to snip this into like a 2 or 3 inch section, about that long. A couple notes about this project before we move to my workshop and I show you how to make this. If you are making this, this part right here is going to be a hinge point. So I would highly suggest that you wrap it in hobby came to give it some structure, like how these ones have really nice edges. If you don't, I would just suggest not messing with it too much, because this is going to be a weak point for the solder and it could fall apart right there. My second note is that the technique for making this really comes in the soldering portion. So I'm going to very quickly go through the cutting and grinding and foiling portion of making this. And then when we get to the soldering part, I will do a more in-depth step-by-step walkthrough of how I solder these, so you make them very nice and secure and functional. Okay, so now I'm gonna go out to my workshop and we are going to switch to VoiceOver Sarah.
The first thing you're going to want to do is take your template and cut your pattern out. When patterns have really thick lines like these, I like to go through and thin them out just so there's more room for the glass and you get less gapping once you've cut out the pieces. Once you have your pattern cut out, you can select your glass and then trace the pattern pieces onto those sheets of glass. One note about cutting out this moon is it does have a pretty steep inward curve that can be difficult to cut, so go slow, take it easy. As you can see at the top of my screen, I had a couple failed attempts because the glass was being really finicky with me today. One other tip I have for cutting glass is really take your time when you're using your grozing pliers and get those cuts as close to the actual shape as you can get them, because it's really going to cut down on your time spent grinding these pieces so they fit really nicely together. Okay, once you've finished cutting out all your pieces, you're going to take them to your grinder and grind all those edges smooth. If you've done a careful job with your grosing pliers, this shouldn't take you very long. This process is also really important because it's going to determine if your pieces fit together nicely and how big your gaps are when you go to solder. After I'm done grinding, I usually take my pieces and wash them in warm water with dish soap just to get all of the grinder glass bits off the edges, but then I go through again with rubbing alcohol and a little towel and wipe all the edges just to make sure they're perfectly clean. Otherwise, the copper foil won't stick well and it'll mess with the structural integrity of the piece. And now you'll go in and foil as you normally would, making sure that it is very even on both sides. Okay, before I start soldering, the first thing I'm going to do is measure my brass tube and cut it down to length. I usually kind of score it and then bend it until it breaks and measure it against my piece to make sure it's the right size. Okay, and you probably just saw that I forgot to put gloves on before I started. You don't have to wear gloves when you solder. I like to because I don't like how flux feels on my hands, and it also protects me from the heat of the solder a little bit if I touch the very hot glass. And now you'll just go through and solder as you normally would. I like to go through and tack solder all my pieces together, and then I go through and build up the larger bead of solder on all the seams. On the back side of this piece, just because it's going to sit on a flat surface, I try to make my bead a little bit flatter than I would on a normal piece. On the top of it, I'm getting a nice rounded bead, but if I did that on the back, it would wobble a little bit when it was sitting on a flat surface. If you're ever soldering and your solder beads aren't coming out nice and smooth, there could be a couple things going on. The first thing I would try is adding more flux, because the solder will only go where the flux is. The second thing is your soldering iron might not be hot enough. And the third thing might be that your copper foil has some kind of oxidation on it, and you could just give it a quick rub down with some steel wool, and that would help the solder stick a little bit better. Okay, now I'm going to take my hobby cane that I'm going to wrap the edges in. My hobby cane stretcher is off camera, so I can't really show you that process, but here I am tack soldering it to one of the seams. And then I'm just going to very carefully wrap it around, making sure the glass is sitting nice and flat in the channel of the cane. When I get back to the end, I'm going to cut it so it sits flat against the other piece, and add another little dollop of solder to that. Don't forget to flux it, otherwise the solder will not stick to it. I'm going to go through and solder it all of the little seams. And then I'm going to go around the edge, and anywhere that the copper foil is exposed, just add a small bead of solder to that to hold the hobby cane on and to give a little bit structure to that hinge point that I was talking about earlier. And you're going to want to repeat the same process on the back. Okay, now we are going to attach our brass tube. The first thing I like to do is hold it with a pair of tweezers, add my flux, and rub solder all over it. This process is called tinning, and it's going to help it solder more smoothly to our little moon piece. Because we're starting with it covered in solder instead of raw brass, the um, solder is going to flow over it and connect it more easily. Now you're going to hold that brass tube at about a 45-degree angle against your piece and just add a little bit of solder to the very end to connect it. You're going to want to give it a minute so that solder really solidifies and holds it in place. Once you have that one connection and you check the position, make sure it's how you want it, you're going to pick up your roll of solder and you're going to drop more beads of solder over the top of that brass tube to fill in the space underneath it between the glass. That'll give it structure and hold it in place and make sure it's not wobbly or anything. If your bead of solder keeps going to one side or is acting weird, you can use gravity to kind of move it where you want it to go. And also remember that the solder will flow where it's hottest. So if you've held your soldering iron in one spot for too long, it's going to go in that direction, and you can touch your soldering iron the opposite direction to move it a little bit. After I'm happy with that connection, I'm just going to go through and touch up any other little solder spots that need to be smoothed out. Okay, after I finish soldering, I again wash it with warm water and dish soap before I put a layer of polish on it. And then I'm going to let that polish dry for a few minutes. Since this is kind of a thin layer, I only let it dry about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to go through and scrub all it off, and it's going to make the solder lines extra shiny and beautiful and get off any oxidation. And once you're finished with your polish, you have your finished incense holder.
I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you go out and make and design all of your own stained glass incense holders. If you like videos like this and you want to see more stained glass content from me, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. And until next time, guys, bye!